Hello out there. My name is Ryan Boyd. I am the Executive Director of Wakefield Community Access Television, and I have the pleasure today of being joined by Representative Kate Lipper-Garabedian, representing the Massachusetts 32nd Middlesex District. So welcome, Representative. How are you today?
Thanks for having me. It's great to see you.
Great to see you too. First thing I want to ask you is that with that title, what does all of that mean? Can you explain, who you are as a representative here in Massachusetts?
Sure, of course. So every state obviously has a legislature. In Massachusetts, we have two separate chambers, a Senate and a House of Representatives, just as we do at the federal level. And in the House of Representatives, there are 160 members currently. So we divide the state up evenly so that every district of those 160 is roughly the same number of residents. And in my case, the 32nd Middlesex District includes the entire city of Melrose, which is where I live, and a little bit less than half of Wakefield, which is where you're sort of, coming in from, and then a tiny slice of Malden. And every 10 years with the census, the lines get redrawn sometimes a little bit because populations shift within the state. I obviously, well, as we'll discuss, have just become a state representative. I haven't lived through that experience. But it's possible that my district might change a little bit in the coming year or two, depending on when the census, analysis is completed and we go through that redistricting process. But for now, I'm really thrilled to have a good portion of Wakefield as part of my district. And of course, I share Wakefield with Representative Wong, and his district includes the remainder of Wakefield and then Saugus. So it's been really wonderful to get to work with him and represent Wakefield together. Of course, then the senator for Wakefield is Senator Lewis. And so there are only 40 senators, so their districts are about 4 times the size of ours. And so he has all of Wakefield. So we're the full delegation representing Wakefield at the State House, Representative Wong and I on the House side, and then Senator Lewis on the Senate side.
Yeah, and we'll get much more into your sort of working relationship with them as this goes on as well.
Sure.
I would like to ask you a little bit just about you. Tell us a little bit about yourself if you can.
Okay, sure. So I have only been a state representative since March. And before that, I have worked in education for my career. So I grew up maybe starting all the way back at the beginning, I grew up in Richmond, Virginia, actually. And both my parents were newspaper reporters. My dad covered sports for the Richmond Times-Dispatch. My mother covered politics and then was an editorial writer for the Norfolk paper. And so I grew up having both an interest in college basketball and in what was happening at our state house in Virginia or at the national level. And then I went to college at a state university in Virginia. And after that, I was a 7th grade teacher. But I always had a passion for students and a passion for schools. I'm a public school product myself. So I worked in the Atlanta public schools right in Sweet Auburn, which is the area where Martin Luther King Jr. was the minister. All my kids walked to school, which meant that there was a lot of community pride there, understandably. But they also faced a lot of challenges in light of their socioeconomic background, in light of their race. And so it was really an eye-opening experience, the most challenging job I've ever had and also the most rewarding. And from there, I went to law school and decided shortly after enrolling in law school that I wanted to really focus on education and think about ways in which I could help children like mine, those students, really succeed and think about policy at a broader level than just what any one individual teacher could accomplish. And so after law school and working for a judge for 1 year, I've worked for over 10 years in education. So I worked first for a group that supported states, education agencies like DESE or districts or higher ed institutions, so across the education spectrum, on just supporting students thinking about policies that would enhance opportunities and break down barriers. And then I went and worked for the state of Massachusetts at the Executive Office of Education, which coordinated across our 3 education departments in Massachusetts, our early education group, which is especially near and dear to my heart as our 2-year-old here at home just started preschool last week in the middle of a snowstorm, no less. And then the K-12 system. And I do have a 2nd grader now who is learning right on the other side of the wall here in a hybrid learning situation in the Melrose Public Schools. and then higher education. And so, I did that for over 5 years. And then at the same time became a city councilor in Melrose, where I really appreciated the opportunity to get to work with my neighbors here in the city and think about how to improve communication and the processes for them to make sure government felt accessible and that they could be informed about what was happening, and also sort of inform and influence the conversation in City Hall. So being a state representative has sort of allowed me to combine those two roles of thinking about larger policy that will enable real change across the Commonwealth, or maybe even serve as a model for other states that are thinking about the same issues. And at the same time, get to still do a lot of constituent services, which has been incredibly important during COVID. And I'm sure we'll talk about that a little bit, but it's certainly been the case that many people are looking, understandably and appropriately so, to their democratically elected government to come up with solutions for these incredibly critical times that we're living in, and think about safety nets that are so important to keep families on their feet, to enable them to access resources when they're facing some problems. And so it's been really my privilege to get to work with folks who are maybe looking for support for the first time and trying to navigate a pretty complicated system. And so that's what a state representative can help with. And I know all of my colleagues in the State House or in the Senate side take a lot of, they appreciate that opportunity to get to work with folks. And so please, if nothing else comes out of this meet conversation with you, if someone tunes in just for a second, you should definitely consider your state representative a resource and someone who can help you if you're facing an issue.
Yeah, absolutely. And on that front, I'm going to ask you this, and I'll go back a little bit.
Okay.
But the resources that are available to folks.
Right.
Who do they contact? They contact your office. Is there a generalized number they can call to get information on the pandemic or anything else that might be happening for them?
Absolutely. So there is a number that's been set up, 211, which is sort of a statewide resource hotline. Recently, it just incorporated the new call center that enables folks 75 and older who are now eligible for COVID vaccines to actually, if they're unable to navigate the internet website to book an appointment, they can reach out via 211 to work with somebody who can help them find an appointment, for example. But 211 can be used for any number of other needs as well. And then, of course, yes, you can call my office or you can email me directly. I have one aide, and the two of us work together to sort of redirect you to the right place. So, for example, unemployment has been a concern for thousands of people in our Commonwealth. And so our office every week is working with probably a dozen or more constituents to try to make sure that whatever delay they have, or if there's a logistical or a technical issue where they're not quite sure where they are in terms of receiving the benefits for which they're eligible, having a state rep's office sort of ping the Department of Unemployment Assistance, I think helps expedite the process sometimes. And also, we just have seen so many of these cases that we can often also answer questions, whereas DUA, is now serving, exponentially more people than it used to. And even as it has staffed up, there can still be delays. So sometimes we can help speed the process up if we know precisely what might be the issue and if we can help you navigate that. So that's another example. I would say also, if you go to my website, kateforrep.com, I've added an entire page there related to COVID resources. So over the course of the last year, I've created a resource on unemployment, and it includes the links of where you would go or the numbers you can call. There's one on small business supports that has over time been updated to include state grant opportunities that have become available, federal loan or grant opportunities. I'm trying to think what else. There's a food resource. Obviously, we're seeing tremendous amount of food insecurity. So there's a resource table there that addresses what each of the school systems is doing to support K-12 students. As you and I were talking earlier, we both have remote or hybrid learners. A lot of times families rely on schools to provide nutrition to their students. So the school systems here in my district and in Wakefield have stepped up to, support students who need healthy meals. But there's also other information on that resource about food banks that are in Wakefield itself or that serve Wakefield residents. We've got one on housing. Housing security is also critically important during a pandemic. You want people to be able to stay in one secure place and not have to feel as though they're, moving around and therefore putting, themselves at risk. So there's a housing resource, one about postpartum and perinatal health. So being pregnant and having a baby can be very challenging, both physically and mentally and emotionally. I've shared, publicly that I suffered from some severe postpartum depression with my first son. And so I have thought and been it's weighed on me to think about the isolation that that new mothers and fathers or parents are experiencing during a pandemic, but there are supports available in a healthy and safe way that you can access. So there's a resource there as well. And I'm probably forgetting one other or two others, but we've definitely got some really helpful, documents online, and you can find those at kateforrep.com.
It's remarkable. All the things you just listed off. I was expecting maybe a couple things, to be able to reach out for, but it's such an important thing and such an important time for it as well. And I know that, for speaking personally, it's for me, like, I think a lot of people can be hesitant to reach out, can be hesitant to call your number because they're, oh, what is she going to care about me? They have so many other things going on, I shouldn't bother them with the issues I have.
Mm-hmm.
It's just not the case. You're all there for people to make sure that they, their voices are heard, that, they can get the help that they need. And I think it's just a wonderful thing what Massachusetts is doing amongst other states and, the whole country. Sure. But just that it's there and that people can feel comfortable to actually use those resources. I think it's so important.
Well, the thing is, there should be no stigma in any of this. No one is unaffected by a pandemic and no one is responsible for it. And I feel very honored that people can trust me. And I want to, instill that trust moving forward. But it truly is an honor to be in this position to help people. And when people do reach out and express their vulnerability, it enables me to become better at my job as well, because what you're going through, someone else is going through as well. And you're letting me in on a part of your life. And that's a real privilege. And I take that very seriously. I think, for example, of an office hours that I did early on as a state rep, where a gentleman joined and we went into a private chat, and he shared with me that he had a brother who had completed a sentence in a house of corrections, and now he was looking for ways to support his brother getting back on his feet. And how difficult is it, for anyone right now to interview for jobs or to apply for benefits, but particularly for that type of population, it can be even more, overwhelming. But him reaching out and sharing that with me enabled me to think more critically about a segment of the state and view policy initiatives or potential legislative changes with a really informed lens. And it helps to put people into the policy when we can have ongoing conversations. So certainly, I think I appreciate the opportunity to help people, and them reaching out, they may help me as well be more effective at bringing their voices to state policymakers.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Based on what you were saying at the start of this, being a teacher for so long and really, really caring about what happens in our school systems, what led you down the path into politics instead of, teacher, administration, principal, superintendent? Like there's different options you could have taken.
Sure.
What got you into politics?
Well, I guess I've always been interested in law. I took the LSAT when I was in college, and, but just sort of, just to see, and then the calling to be a teacher was really what appealed to me and spoke to me. I'd worked during college for the summers as a counselor or a summer school teacher. And even in high school, I was, a camp counselor. I just really have always appreciated the chance to be in a group of, students a little bit younger than I am. And, I guess, but I've always been interested in law. As I said, like my mother covered political developments. I remember going on, she would cover campaigns. So I remember going to Appomattox, Virginia for a rally for the for governor, who became governor, but Doug Wilder was the candidate for the Democrats. He became the first elected Black governor in the United States. And I just remember being with her and watching her sort of interview him afterwards, or the crowd. You know, I don't know if that sort of ingrained in me a little hint of maybe this is, you know, it'd be neat to be able to do these debates or, you know, conversations or what have you. But I think law school always appealed to me in some way about thinking about never losing sight of the micro and the anecdotal and the everyday lived experience, but also recognizing we put in place a framework of laws that approximate what would be the best way in which to address a challenge most equitably, most fairly, most effectively. And law school enables you to sort of think about things at a macro level. And then, you know, why I don't know quite what happened in terms of running for city council. I'm sure it was a confluence of different things. But we moved to Melrose. Our first son, you know, was not even one yet. And we knew this is the first home we've ever owned. And we knew we were going to be here a long time. So I was looking for things that I might do to be involved in the community. And just thinking about city council was appealing in terms of considering, you know, what kind of framework we wanted at a city level. And then also just reinforcing for people that government can really work for them, and wanting to be, you know, a very involved, communicative, engaged member of the city council. So, you know, I've sort of taken that onto the state rep thing with making these, you know, resources available to folks through my website or on social media, or doing a weekly newsletter. It was every 2 weeks every twice a week for a while. Right. I got in and I'd been doing a newsletter for city council that was once every month or two, but it seemed like with COVID and the state, there was just so much happening. So for a while it was 2 times a week, and now we do it weekly, but it's just a way to make sure people feel connected to what's happening and that they're aware of things that are developing or where they can go if they have a need. So I guess, you know, I just think democratically elected government can make such a difference for people. And I've seen it happen, including in some of the stories that my mother wrote early on. And so just you know, being able to bring people's voices to the table at the State House or at the City Council chamber has been really an honor to be able to do.
And I think you bring up a very good point there too. I think a lot of people, when they think about politics, you know, they're thinking U.S. Senate, U.S. representatives, you know, working with the presidency and all this stuff. And I think a lot of things get lost sort of on that local level, you know, whether it's a city council or your local, you know, state representatives in legislature and things of that sort. So much can be done on a more local level, you know. Like, people focus so much on the national level, which is great, but if, you know, I feel like on the local level, it's, you know, the person who lives over on Main Street has an issue, they bring it to you and something can be done about it, you know?
Sure.
And I think that's overlooked a lot of the time on this sort of the local government level of things. And it's really important that people understand they have a voice, it matters, and it is listened to as well.
Right. And you can often see sort of more immediate impact, right? Mm-hmm. So it's, if someone has a really good idea at this local level, it can, you know, quickly evolve into being developed and then implemented. And what's great about that is we live in this synergistic dynamic where, you know, you look for models around the state right now for innovative ideas that other places are grappling with, and you can learn from each other. And if we see enough of a trend, or if we see one sort of outlier, but it's just, you know, doing great work, we can bring that up to Beacon Hill, to the state, and think about if there's a way to share that more broadly. If we want to, you know, make sure that everyone has an awareness of a new approach that's really being, you know, working well for the residents of the municipality where it's been implemented.
Now, I'd like to ask you just a little bit. I know you said, you know, you're new to the game, I guess, when it comes to being in the state legislature. So what was it like, you know, to run for the seat that you have now, and then, you know, when you won, you know, just tell me a little bit what that experience was like for folks who might be interested in something similar down the line too.
Sure. So when I ran in the special election, it was pre-COVID. So it was just a typical campaign where we actually got to go canvassing, and I knocked on hundreds, if not 1,000 doors shortly after I had just run for city council reelection. So, we started in Wakefield actually, because we wanted to make sure, since I had just been in Melrose for the city election, going to Wakefield made a lot of sense just to hear from folks there and introduce myself. And I was lucky to have a lot of volunteers and supporters who came as well. We did our campaign kickoff at the dockside, which was great, and went from there. So the primary was on in early February, and then the general was March 3rd. So I got elected, and then the whole world, the bottom fell out. So I could go back on my text chain and sort of see where, okay, we're going to have you come to the State House tomorrow to get sworn in, okay. And then, oh, never mind, we can't do it that day, so it was, and by the time I got sworn in, I think it was March 25th, it's sort of an interesting artifact in time, because you've got me physically distanced from the governor, because the State House was shut down. So we're on the grand staircase, which I don't think any rep has ever been sworn in on the grand staircase. Typically you do it in the chamber. So we're physically distanced, but we're not masked yet. So it's sort of that moment where we, and that's sort of what the whole year has felt like, right? We learn new things as we go, and we have to adjust and evolve and adapt. But so that was sort of wild. I couldn't bring my sons, Harrison or Oscar, and my husband, Mark, couldn't come with me. And so I've never taken a vote in the House chamber. I couldn't tell you where my seat is because I've never gone in for a session. I've done everything remotely. I've gone back twice since I was sworn in, once to pick up stationery, and once because I was meeting a new colleague outside for a physically distanced coffee, but I decided on a whim I'd go early and get the key to the office suite where I would have sat, and just went up and, took it in, but, I don't know which desk in that suite would have been mine. So it's all been done remotely. And we're very lucky that we have the technology like what you and I are using today, Ryan, or, even just conference lines for phones. It would have, 10, 20 years ago, it would have been, I'm not quite sure how we would have navigated some of this.
Yeah, it's wild to think about. I mean, I've never considered the fact that you haven't been on the floor to cast a vote. Like that's, it makes perfect sense, but I didn't even occur to me. That's wild.
Yeah.
Since being elected, are there any COVID? I assume is probably the number one issue everyone's been working on, but please, if you want to talk about that and any other issues that you and your colleagues have been working on that you're excited for, or anything that's coming up that you might be excited to talk about.
Sure. So when I was elected the legislature sits for 2-year sessions. We get sworn in January of an odd year, so January 2021, because we run in the even years. So we just started a new session. So when I was sworn in March, we were ending a session. It was close to the end of a session that typically would complete, in July. And then we don't really have formal sessions after that because it's an election year and people are back in their districts and campaigning. Well, this year, because of COVID, so many things were delayed and there were so many critical issues that we were still working on that the legislature agreed, which was sort of historical, to go past our July 31st typical deadline and go all the way until we were meeting until, was it like 4 a.m. On the night before I got sworn in January. So yes, COVID was you're absolutely right. That has been and will certainly remain for this session the number one priority, continuing to address both the public health demands of a pandemic, as well as the economic and financial fallout from it. And so you see during 2020, a number of bills that we passed and that the governor signed related specifically to those concerns with respect to, funding and critical initiatives, establishing a 2020 election approach that allowed for people to participate in that civic responsibility in safer ways through expanded access through voting by mail or longer early in voting time periods by way of example. But then we also worked on a number of other bills. So there was the law enforcement reform bill that was signed into law by the governor. We did an economic development bill that involved a lot of, it was a COVID response, but broader than that, it included attention to longstanding affordability issues around housing, for example. We did a bill on reproductive healthcare access toward the end of the session. So there are any number of other things that, we worked on. And then going into this new session, the way that it will work is obviously we'll be working on the budget. So we also completed the budget exercise much later than we typically would because we were still trying to grapple with what COVID had done to state revenue and what type of federal support might be coming through stimulus bills. But we passed a budget at the end of the calendar year as well. So we're already back now into a budget cycle where the governor put forward his budget proposal for the fiscal 22 year, which will begin July 1st of this year. And now the House will take that up and, produce our own budget proposal. The Senate will then follow suit. We'll reconcile, we'll get it to the governor, and hopefully all this gets done by July 1st. So that's going to happen. And the budget is a vehicle where a lot of policy can happen in addition to the funding, but it's so important because where we fund is what we value. So it's, a really important exercise. And then you have all the bills that people can file. And we have, what I've learned is there's a bill filing deadline, and we got an extension of 1 month, but it's coming up a week from Friday. Any bill that's filed by that day will be guaranteed a hearing before a committee. So there's an incentive to get it done early in the session. And then all the bills get assigned to committees, and the committees have to look through their docket and, kind of organize the bills and have hearings where people can submit testimony or maybe even, come and speak, probably over Zoom still for a while at least. So I'm working on a number of bills related to that. And then you can file bill, what's called a late file. And many bills will, still move after this deadline, but they're not guaranteed a hearing. So just by way of one example, a bill that I've been working on with the chair of the Higher Education Committee, it's something that's been filed in the past, but it's an area in which I have a lot of expertise because of my background in the jobs that I've held previously, is around student data privacy. And so our state laws have not been updated since we really hit the internet age and since data has become digital. FERPA is the federal law. The regulations have been updated in the last 10 years, but the law itself, the statute, hasn't been. And so it was written in the 70s when data wasn't digital yet. Well, now, as you know, with a kindergartner or me with a second grader, our kids have this digital portfolio. I mean, a whole, and I don't, what are the vendors doing with that information? What kind of responsibilities do they have? What are the prohibitions on how they can use Harrison's information? His image, the work that he's doing, how long he stays on a certain page, whatever it might be. I mean, data is so critical for educators. I remember as a teacher being able to look at, work my students had produced or whatever else it might be to help inform and personalize instruction for them. And digital data could be even more powerful for a teacher, but it needs to be used appropriately. So I've been working with the chair. We're going to refile that bill with some, I think, important updates and improvements. And I'm really hopeful that in a COVID environment, people will see this as a real priority. A number of states have already updated their laws in student data privacy, and we just haven't yet. But that's by way of one example of something I'm looking forward to filing by next week.
Well, just in case anybody thought that the local legislation wasn't busy,
Right.
I think you're proving them wrong right now. That's for sure.
Yeah,
that's a lot on the plate for all of you. I know that your new colleagues you already mentioned, but you're working with Representative Donald Wong, Senator Jason Lewis. How has it been working with them? And aside from them as well, I mean, your seat was occupied by now Mayor Paul Brodeur.
Yes.
So has he reached out to you at all? What's it been like working with your new colleagues?
Sure. So all three of the gentlemen you mentioned have been incredibly helpful and supportive and great partners to work with. I was just on the phone with Rep. Wong this morning. We were talking about, an issue for Wakefield and how we're going to go in on a joint letter together about it. He was kind enough to reach out to me in the first few weeks of the pandemic to say, hey, I'm going to be over at the town hall. Come by. Let's, deliver some masks together. So it's very much a collaborative effort. And then Senator Lewis is quite the same as well, and with a slightly more resourced office, because senators tend to have a little bit more staff. His staff has been fantastic as well in terms of assisting with scheduling things, or making sure that we're brought into important conversations that the senator is spearheading about issues that matter to Wakefield. So it's very nice to have a team of folks representing Wakefield and to feel as though we're working really well together. And then Mayor Broder has absolutely been a huge resource to me. I think I probably check in with him every day about something or another. So whether that's a text or a phone call or a quick virtual meeting, it's it helps me be more effective, because he was at the State House for, a good number of sessions, made his way all the way up to be a chair of a committee, so has a good feel for the House. And I can look to him to say, well, how did you handle something like this? And he's obviously very respectful, says, you might want to do it differently, but here's what I did. And he has, the backstory to things that I may be coming into new and may have already looked at something. So I'm very fortunate to have a good sponsor in him. He's also kept an eye out for ways in which I can be effective at my job and suggested them. So it makes a huge difference. Very few people, I assume, professionally do it all alone, and I certainly don't. So it's great to have these three elected officials, supporting me, as well as, the Wakefield Town Council, the Wakefield School Committee members have been great about letting me know if things are happening in Wakefield that I, might want to join or come to virtually or just be aware of. And that's really important too, as we were saying earlier, that local state relationship is critical. Because your local elected officials, and Wakefield, of course, has an election coming up this spring. So hopefully everyone is looking at the candidates and thinking about, how to be involved. And to your point, Ryan, who we elect at the local level can have the most immediate impact on our day-to-day. But in any event, having good relationships with the town councilors, the school committee members, has also assisted me in being able to identify things that are important for Wakefield residents and ways to make sure that they're getting information that will be useful.
Now, I have a question about, to wrap things up a little bit.
Yeah.
If folks watching this at home, they listen to you and they say, you know what, I'm interested. I want to try something. I want to get involved. I want to join my local council or run for office.
Right.
Do you have any advice for folks who also want to help, represent the folks in their town and their district?
Sure. Well, I should say absolutely do it. Because, hang on one second. I'll be there in 2 minutes. Lunchtime. And you're welcome to keep that in, because that's just the day-to-day, and I think people will appreciate it at home. I would say absolutely get involved. The more perspectives and people at the table, the better the outcome usually. I really think the process of policymaking benefits when you have as many people involved as possible who are, invested and interested. In addition to town council and school committee, Wakefield has a number of other elected boards and commissions. And then there are many that are just voluntary. So you just show up and start coming and get involved. I should know this, and you can probably help confirm it, Ryan, but I expect, there is a website on town, at the city of, or the town of Wakefield's, website that sort of lists out all the boards and commissions. I know Melrose has that, and you can sort of see, like, where can I sign up? Where can I get involved? If there's somebody who's doing a job that you think looks interesting, reach out to them directly and learn a little bit more. I mean, you've had a chance to hear from me a little bit about what it's like to be a state rep, but certainly I imagine there's an open door policy with most of the town councilors and school committee members to hear more about what it's like the day-to-day to do that. What are the advantages of being in that role? What are some of the challenges? But it should, I think, especially maybe at the local level, there is a lot of ability to just step right in and get involved, and then see where that takes you and what you enjoy about that role, and where, what else might you want to take on, and then I'll go from there.
And you're absolutely right. Wakefield does have it listed as well. And,
yes.
And counselors and school committee members, they have their open office hours. So, if you ever want to reach out to them, they're available. They try to make a point of, letting folks know as much as they can. These are
exactly.
Come contact me. I'm here for you. And, I don't think I've had a meeting with either with any one of them, without someone saying, a situator has brought this up to me. I need to talk about this. This is an issue. We got to fix this. I mean, it happens there's a one tonight, a town council meeting tonight. I guarantee someone's going to bring something up. It's just it's wonderful the access that folks have.
And of course, as a town, Wakefield has town meetings, so there's also that in terms of showing up for those meetings and just getting a sense of the full panoply of issues that are happening at the town level, and that may spearhead a different initiative, or plant a seed in your mind about something you'd like to also be working on. So that's another great thing to do.
Absolutely. I don't want to take up much more of your time. It is lunchtime as it sounds, so I feel like you got to take off the rep hat, put on the mom hat for a little while, and take care of that. So Representative Kate Lipper-Garabedian, thank you so much for joining me today. I'm sure we'll be talking again real soon, and be looking forward to that.
My pleasure, Ryan. I really appreciate you doing this. I'm glad to be in touch with you and with the residents of Wakefield. We can probably share my contact information so that they can reach out by email, by phone, and check out the website with the different resources that are available during this time. And I just hope that you stay well and your family also, and folks watching at home as well. So please be well. Take care.
Take care, and thank you. We'll see you next time.
All right.